What's going on, everybody? Once again, Joe from Flysimware Simulation Software here today at ATP Jet Center at Daytona Beach Airport, home of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, to show you the Learjet 35A. This aircraft we released about I'd say 4 or 5 months ago, and it has been one of our, if not our best seller. I've gotten incredibly positive reviews. It represents a total step up in terms of system simulation and realism for us, and we're thrilled that you guys are so happy with it. But for those of you that are still maybe on the fence, or those of you that are just finding out about the airplane now through this video, again, this is the Flysimware Simulations Software Learjet 35A for FSX and prepared. So I just wanted to take a moment, again, for those of you that haven't acquired the airplane yet, to show you the airplane in detail and take a quick look at it. So we're just going to do a walk around. I'll explain to you some of the features of the airplane and what the airplane's all about, and we'll go from there. We, again, are on the ground at Daytona Beach over at ATP Jet, and we've got the airplane in a partially powered up state on the GPU here. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the history of the Learjet, some of the features of the aircraft, a quick cockpit tour, and also demonstrate an engine start for our customers that already have the airplane, and since that I know has been a little bit of a confusing issue for some of you. So we'll do a quick engine start up, and let's get going. So one of the first things you notice when you see a 30 series Lear sitting on the ramp is it's got incredible ramp presence, and a lot of that is due to these monster tip tanks it has out on the end of each wing. These tip tanks hold 1,200 pounds per side, so they are about 181 gallons per side. A lot of fuel out there in the tip tanks, and the tip tanks on this airplane, as with most airplanes that have tip tanks, the tip tanks are the main fuel tanks on this airplane. The airplane's fuel system is a little bit intricate and complex. It's got 5 fuel tanks, 2 wing tanks, 2 tip tanks, and a small fuselage tank, which we call, us Learjet pilots call the trunk tank. So 5 fuel tanks, a little bit complicated to manage, especially if you're going to use fuel from the trunk tank. Otherwise, if the trunk tank is empty, it's a very easy fuel system to manage. But it's got its little details. So the Learjet Model 35 and 36, which looks from the outside almost identical to a 35, were developments off of the earlier Learjet 25 airplane. And as most of you I'm sure know, the 25 was a turbojet-powered airplane, and the 35 is the fanjet-powered airplane. But a lot of people out there, for whatever reason, many pilots have this misconception that a Lear 35 is merely a Lear 25 with tip tanks, and with turbofan engines. I'm sorry, and that is not the case. The differences are far more extensive than merely a different type of engine. The Learjet 25 had the General Electric CJ610 engine, again, which was a pure turbojet engine. The Lear 35 has the Garrett TFE 731 engine, very popular, very reliable turbofan engine, and it's also got a very different wing. It has a soft flight wing, which the soft flight conversion was available for the 20 series Lear, but it was still not quite the same wing. So this is a soft flight wing. The wingspan of the 35 is longer. And overall, this airplane has much more advanced systems. And just to cover it, because I know that I'll probably get a question in the comments, the Lear 36 is a long-range version of the Lear 35. The cabin is about 18 inches shorter. It's about 1.5 feet shorter, and that is to accommodate more fuel in that fuselage tank. And the Lear 36 is actually kind of a neat airplane. They didn't build very many of them. There's only a handful of them left out there. But the Lear 36 has coast-to-coast U.S. range in both directions, which is very cool. So, as with any walk-around, we'll get started here at the door. And that's just kind of a logical place to start any pre-flight or any walk-around. It just kind of makes sense. So we'll start at the door, and we'll work our way clockwise around the airplane. So, starting at the cabin door, 2-piece clamshell door with a pneumatic door sealer. We'll talk about that once we get inside the airplane. So moving up here, we have 2 probes that we have to check as part of our pre-flight. Oop, I don't know what just happened with that camera. That was weird. So the top one here is the angle of attack vane, and that's going to give us our angle of attack information. And the bottom one down here is actually the pitot tube. Moving around the airplane, we want to also check these two ducts that you'll see up on the windshield. These two interesting looking guys down here at the base of each windshield. Those are the bleed air ducts. That the airplane has a bleed air windshield, so ice is both removed and prevented from forming on the windshield by blowing hot air, bleed air directly off the engines directly onto the windshield, and that is how we have our windshield anti-ice set up. Checking our nose wheel tire. Interesting fact, this is, you'll notice that this tire has a lip on it, if you can see that. Out on the sides here and here, along the side, you'll see that this tire has a lip. And this is called a chined tire, and they've become popular on a lot of different high-performance jet aircraft, but the Lear was the first one to have a chined tire. And what that does is, as the nose wheel splashes through puddles on the runway, those chines on the side of the tire deflect the water out to the sides and away from the engines, so that you don't risk water splashing off the nose wheel back into the engines and causing a flame out. So fun little fact there with the nose wheel tire. It's amazing how much thought and engineering goes into building one of these airplanes. Same thing, angle of attack vane, pitot tube over here on the other side of the airplane. Make our way back, looking at the integrity of the leading edge of the wing, as well as our heating element here. This is a hot wing, so the shiny part that you see on the front is the part that's heated, again, by bleed air from the engines to prevent ice from forming or remove it. We'll come around, we'll check our fuel caps. The Lear 35 is not a single-point refueling airplane, so it must be manually fueled. And if you ever want some entertainment, or you're having a bad day, and you just need proof that somewhere out there someone is having a worse day than you are, just go ahead and go to Google and type in Lear fueling mishap, and you will see what happens when you don't know how to put fuel in a Learjet. Specifically one with tip tanks. Checking our fuel caps, checking our wingtip nav lights and strobe lights, checking our static wicks on the back of our tip tank. And then this nozzle here is actually a fuel jettison nozzle. The Lear 35 does have the ability to jettison fuel only from the tip tanks, but that's the biggest tank, so that's the only place you'd really want to jettison it from. And if you flip one switch in the cockpit, it opens a valve that dumps all the fuel, all 1,200 pounds of fuel, out of each tip tank in less than 3 minutes. It dumps very, very quickly. So that's what those are. Those are the fuel tip tank dumps. Moving along. This is our aileron here. And as you can probably see, the aileron has balance tabs. So as the aileron moves up, there's a couple of different types of tabs. That's not actually the aileron trim tab. That's a balance tab. There's a few different types of tabs. There's balance tabs, there's servo tabs, there's anti-servo tabs, and they're all designed to just affect the control feel of the airplane. So how much or how little input is required to generate a given roll rate, how heavy or how light the airplane feels on the controls. A lot of that can be accomplished with balance tabs, anti-servo tabs, or roll tabs. And in general, what this balance tab is doing, essentially, is making the control force on the yoke less than what it would normally be. So it's making it easier to roll the airplane. And the way it does that is as we move this aileron up into the relative wind, you'll see that the balance tab remains in the same place. And what that's doing is that's actually taking a portion of the aileron and reducing the drag of the aileron into the relative wind. Same thing when we go down, it stays out of the way of the relative wind. And by taking that little bit of drag off, you decrease the amount of control input, the amount of control force, well, not necessarily input, but definitely control force that you would need to move that control surface otherwise. Again, very simple aerodynamic trick, very, very cool. The same thing could be accomplished to a further extent by the use of a servo tab, which would move, instead of remaining in the same place, a servo tab would actually move opposite the direction of the control surface and sort of help it along. So push the control surface in the direction you want to move it. And then an anti-servo tab would do the exact opposite. So an anti-servo tab would move in the same direction as the control surface, and that would make it harder for you to roll in that control input. But anyway, moving along. Inboard part of the wing here, we have our Fowler flaps and our spoilers. I can't show you either one because they're hydraulic and they can only be operated with an engine running. So I can't show them to you now, but single-stage Fowler flap and a straight board spoiler up here on top of the wing. The spoilers in the airplane can be activated in flight, and they can be used right up to VNE. However, most Learjet operators try not to use them in flight because they make a hell of a racket and they cause a lot of airframe vibration. So especially with passengers on the airplane, you try to avoid it. And it's totally avoidable as long as your speed and descent management is sound. Checking our thrust reversers. These are de-Howard thrust reversers. The Lear 35 was offered with 3 tailpipe configs. De-Howard thrust reversers, which are clamshell reversers like you see here. Aranca thrust reversers, which were cascade-style reversers that you see on Boeing 737s, large aircraft like that. And straight tailpipes with no thrust reversers. So those were the 3 configuration options on the airplane. And we have the de-Howards here. They were the most popular option. Checking the tail, checking our tail nav light, our tail strobe light, checking the movement of the rudder, etc. Fun fact, although not simulated, you'll see this hatch on the bottom of the airplane here. This hatch with this circle in the middle of it, that tannish, whitish looking circle, that's actually a drag chute. Believe it or not, the 20 and 30 series, and I believe even the 55, was offered with an optional and available drag chute if you wanted it. And it's a drag chute in every sense of the term, just like fighter jets have. If you think you're going to run off the end of the runway or you need more stopping power, you can pull the drag chute, and that'll help slow you down. The only thing that I could really think of in terms of when you'd want to use this, from a procedural standpoint, because it's got some limitations on it, so you can't use the drag chute. You can't use the drag chute and the thrust reversers. So, for example, another limitation is that you also can't use the thrust reverser on the remaining engine if you're landing with an engine failed. So with that said, I could see, like, maybe if you're landing with an engine out and you want a little more stopping power, maybe you could pop the chute because you can't use the TR on the good engine anyway. But once you pull the handle and pop the drag chute, it can be detached from the cockpit. So you can just push the handle back down and that'll jettison the chute from the airplane. But once you deploy the chute, it's very, very, very expensive to have repacked. So the chute has to be deployed, I believe, at the 12-year inspection on a Lear. So once every 12 years you have to pop the chute. It might even be more frequently than that. It might be every 5. But otherwise, you don't really deploy it unless it's an emergency or you need it because it's very expensive to repack. So that's the drag chute. And moving along, checking our other stuff here. Here's our GPU, our Hobart Ground Power Unit. Repeating a lot of the same pre-flight items that we did on the other side of the airplane over here. And we'll move along back up towards the door. And we'll head inside the airplane, take a look at the cockpit, and do a quick engine start. Okay, here we are, just stepped into the cabin. You can see the cabin of our Lear 35 here, and the flight deck up there. We'll head up there in just a second. Really quick, just wanted to take a second to show you how we close the door on the Lear. It's a little unique in real life, and we chose to simulate it completely in Flight Sim. Now, I just want to state before I do all this that if you don't want to have to do all this when you close the door, in Flight Sim, you can close it very simply with 2 simple clicks right through our Aircraft Options Manager. So that is the disclaimer before we go through with this. But I think most of you will find this to be incredibly immersive, very realistic, and we've gotten a ton of positive feedback on the door closing mechanism. People love this, and this, in my opinion, is the kind of thing that just creates immersion in a Flight Sim airplane, along with, good sounds and things like that. Systems that you can really interact with, and tasks you can complete on the airplane that you really have to do exactly the way you do it in real life. So, first thing we're going to do is close both halves of the door. So we're going to pull the bottom half up, and there's a little tiny ratchet mechanism that will keep that bottom half up. And then we'll pull the top half shut, so we'll cycle the door, bottom half, top half. So now the door is closed, but not latched. So the first thing we do is latch the bottom half of the door by rotating the handle towards the nose of the aircraft. So now the handle is latched. Now what we have to do is, the seal that's created by the top half of this door is so tight that you literally, physically, do not have the strength to pull it shut on your own. It's such a tight seal. So Learjet, or at the time Gates, incorporated an electric door seal motor. So before we can close this top latch, it literally will not let you latch it right now. Before we can close this top latch, the first thing we have to do is seal the top half of the door, and we do that with this little toggle switch down here. So we're going to run the motor. And the motor is now run, and the door is now pulling a seal. So now that the motor is holding the door shut and we have a good seal, we can rotate the top handle. Now the door is latched. Now we also have to run the motor one more time to release that sealing mechanism so that if we have to open the door in the event of an emergency, we can get it open. If you leave the motor engaged and unlatch the door, you won't be able to open it. So we have to make sure that we unlatch this, or unseal the door, or disengage the motor. Run it again. And that's that. Now the cabin door is completely closed and latched, and let's head up to the flight deck. So like I said, we have the airplane in a partial power configuration right now. I'm going to snap into the pilot seat. Partial power configuration, so it's just sitting here on ground power with the batteries on. So let's go ahead and get a few more systems turned on. We're going to turn on our primary and secondary inverters, and that's going to bring our attitude gyros to life. So you'll see our attitude indicators come up, and you can probably hear the inverter running. We'll reset our master warning. We'll do a quick annunciator panel test too. So you can see our fire T-handles flash. Very good. Scoot up a little bit so you guys can see. And we'll go ahead and turn on a couple of systems as well as our avionics. So we're going to go ahead and turn the radio altimeter on. Autopilot master switch, that just provides power to the computer. It doesn't, under any circumstances, turn on the autopilot, just provides power. Emergency battery switch for that's for our little peanut gyro. That'll go to standby, and you'll see the flag go away. And our AC bus will go to primary. And then working across, fuel computers are on. Generators are off. Starters are off. Air ignitions are off. We'll go ahead and turn our anti-skid on while we're here. Turn our stall warnings on after the engine start, and now we'll come down to the center pedestal and flip on our avionics. And you can see our fuel management panel here as well. This is where we manage all the fuel jettison. We can check the quantity in each fuel tank. By rotating the knob, the gauge will display the corresponding tank, and we can transfer fuel between our trunk tank and our wing tanks. And also the yaw damp controls, the electric pitch trim, a lot of that stuff is down there on the pedestal. But generally we don't spend too much time down there in flight. Okay, so let's do a quick engine start. And I'll demonstrate how to do this. It's very simple. I know a lot of you have said that you're a little confused about it. And I guarantee the confusion is coming from the thrust levers. And I'll show you why. So one thing that many developers, including Microsoft with their default jets, but a lot of third-party software does not include, are thrust levers that have an integrated fuel shutoff feature, which a lot of corporate jets do. You don't see it in the airliners, really. I really can't think of one off the top of my head that has it. But for example, in a 737, you have the thrust levers, and then you have the two fuel control levers below them that turn the fuel on and off. In an airplane like a Lear, the fuel shutoff is done entirely with the thrust levers themselves. So you have an idle position, which is up here, and then you can move the thrust levers like so. So you have an idle position, and then if you move, I'm going to scoot up a little bit. If you lift this little latch, that little white latch on the side of the stem, if you lift that up, you can pull the thrust lever down into cutoff. And that's how you shut the engines down, is by moving it down like that. So fuel on, fuel off, fuel on, fuel off. So we simulated this because this is something that very few developers out there have either realized or decided to simulate. We wanted to do it. Fun fact, if you want to shut down both engines simultaneously, you can click anywhere on the side of the stems here with the center mouse wheel click, and that will simultaneously pull them into idle cutoff for you. Okay, so quick engine start. What we're going to do is engage the starter. Again, we're on the ground power unit right now. We're going to engage the starter. Once we have sufficient rotation, which in this case is going to be about 17%. We're going to go ahead and turn the fuel on and then monitor for a hot start, and that's it. It's that simple, guys. So let's go ahead and do this. So we're going to start the right engine. So right engine comes down to start. We're looking for a start light. There's our start light. Rotation. Here comes the fuel. Okay, that looks like a good start. Okay, it's a good start on the right side. And then you would simply repeat the process for the left. We'll go ahead and turn our starter switch out of start and put it in generator. Now we have a generator online. And that's it, guys. It's that simple. So I hope you enjoyed this quick overview of the Lear 35. If you don't have the Lear 35 yet and you want to purchase it, head over to the Flysimware store. Can be found right on our website. Or you can also head over to the Facebook page for Flysimware simulation software. And you can see previews of our upcoming products, all that there. And support is offered either via our ticket system, or if you have a quick question, you can always drop it over at the AvSim forums in the official Flysimware forum over at AvSim. And again, big thanks to AvSim for hosting our forum. We really, really appreciate that. And until next time, it's been Joe from Flysimware. Fly safe, everybody.